The purpose of this video is to demonstrate that Maura Murray was probably parked a mere 3 or 4 minutes from Vasi the night that he was hit and the night that she was found in her state of dissociation. The reason I'm doing this is because I've never seen the case made for how close Maura actually was to Vasi, and when you take everything else in context, it begs explanation. The second half of the video, I'm going to show you some really weird stuff that came out in a recent podcast. Now, the image we're looking at here shows where I kind of speculated in my last video that Maura might have parked during the snowstorm, which was right across from Melville Hall. In this video, I want to talk about something called resident staff parking. Clint Harding had reached out in the comment section of my last video, the Vasi Connection, and he was talking about the time that he visited UMass in 2009, I think it was. And in 2009, he kind of parked outside of Melville Hall. And when he parked outside of Melville Hall, he was doing whatever he was doing, his interviews and his business inside Melville Hall, and sort of glancing back towards his car. And he was glancing at his car because he was worried that he was going to get towed, because he thinks that he was parked in a security parking spot, like a parking spot that was reserved for security. So he's parked right here on the right. And here's his comment to me, sort of reduced. You could pause this and read the rest if you want. But, quote, "Again, noting a sign talking about security parking, all others towed," end quote. And so if that's where that spot is, it got me thinking, was there security parking at this time? Because that would be pretty important and just make all the sense in the world that the school, which is a business, provide parking for their employees. Maura is residence hall security personnel. What better person to take one of those reserved spaces? It almost strikes me as like a liability not to have good parking for your security staff, because what if they need to take effective action of some kind, to have a vehicle nearby, right? Like, that's the staff that needs those spots. When I got onto the UMass website to try and narrow this down a bit, I had found that there's actually a parking map. And on that parking map, you have options to toggle through various layers and filters and get an idea of how parking's run. And so one of the things I immediately noticed is this parking lot. It's got accessible parking, loading zones, and reserved spaces. And so I had to learn more about these reserved spaces. So the first thing I did was try to get a look at the signs in that parking lot, and I can't really see them. You can see that the middle one sort of looks like it's red and white. You can see the accessible one on the far end there, and a couple like student cars, like I think that's a Hyundai Tiburon, then a Ford Focus. Ford Focus could really go either way. So here's another angle, even worse for seeing what's on the sign, but you can kind of see how the sign's made up. It's like a taller rectangle and then a smaller rectangle below it, and the focus again there. So this didn't help much, so I figured I would zoom out and toggle the filter for reserved spaces all through the university and see if I could drive by one on Google Maps and find it that way. And so again, all of the dorms, all of the faculties, they all have a few of these, accessible loading. Here I've just got the reserved spaces toggled, but they've all got some of this. So there's like a system. There's some coherency to the parking scheme at UMass. And when I zoom in on some of them, I get this sign that reads resident staff, and it's got a little picture of a tow truck. So maybe that's what Clint saw, but regardless, Maura is resident staff. And a couple variations of that. And so this one in particular, it's got the same little bubble on the bottom that the signs in Maura's lot have. So if that's what those are, then she's got only a 3-minute drive from where she parked, and I put in Thorough Hall because that's what you technically have to start at to get from the right parking lot. But she's only 3 minutes away if that's a security staff parking lot. Okay, And for anyone who's wondering why does it have to be security staff, I mean, there's 4 different spaces. Could it be the caretaker? Yes, it could probably be the caretaker, only how many caretakers does each building need? Certainly not 4. And outside of that, how much staff does a dormitory like this require? The security staff, maybe a caretaker, and that's really all I can think of. So there's that. There's also this other aspect, which is free parking. I know from my experience in university, there was free parking in the evenings and on the weekends. I also remembered on episode 132, Missing Maura Murray podcast, the UMass student that they have on and interviewed mentioned that the parking was monitored from like 7 to 7 or something like that, if I'm recalling correctly. In addition to that, Ryan Ben Harris, a source of information in my previous video, also a former UMass student from around this era that we're talking about, he had this to say, quote, "From my experience at UMass, I wouldn't entirely dispel the notion that Maura's car wasn't possibly parked somewhere other than the student parking lot. I think she moved it closer to Melville for whatever reason before her shift. That could entirely eradicate the explanation that her car was just too far away for her to be bothered to go get. She could have found metered parking in Southwest. She also could have parked in the do not park zone somewhere near Melville if she found a place that she was confident wouldn't result in a ticket or tow. This wasn't her first night on campus. She may have known of places her car could be safe around the building without repercussions from past experience. Campus parking tended not to be entirely on patrol after certain hours, and if she knew of a place that she could park late at night, she could have moved her car there, especially if she was planning to move it back to her lot after her shift, so it's technically not overnight parking. In the early 2000s, people parked in places they weren't allowed to on campus all the time, sometimes understanding the risk of repercussion," end quote. We go back to our interactive parking map, and we find that if we toggle to free parking on weekends, now in 2021, we can see that there's parking in lot 42 on the weekends. And the colors mean, what types of people can park there. So you've got faculty and staff only in the red lot. Of course, when it's a weekend, that red lot becomes a free-for-all. The blue lot, which is around Melville, that one never becomes available on the weekend. You'll see it doesn't light up. And so this is how the campus works now, and it fits the guy's memory from back then, which is important. So it's probably always that way. So you take the filter off and put evenings on, and lot 42 is available again. And the other similar lots that are available on the weekends are now up for grabs again. And so that's really important because it fits with their memories. And so it was probably always that way. And so it's just another opportunity for Maura to park really close to where Vasi was hit. You'll see that you can have a lot be designated as blue and also further subcategorized as accessible, loading, or reserve spots. So I just wanted to point that out. So I guess a bird's eye view, to reiterate, and I put in Thoreau Hall because that's where I have to technically start from to get the right parking lot to near where Vasi was hit. 48 Triangle is about 3 minutes. This brings us to clinicals. And in my last video, I had speculated that maybe Maura was moving her car around because she had clinicals on Friday, but we've never really been able to find that. Though I kept searching, and I did find something. This passage starts with someone named Jessica popping in to say, hey, just so everyone knows, Maura worked till 3 on Thursday. There's some other info. And then someone named Sharon comes in, starts saying some stuff about what Maura was doing before she went missing. I'll let you pause that and read it if you want, but I'm going to cut to the chase here. Quote, on Friday, she went to class and clinicals. Her day would have had to start at the latest around 7 in order to shower, etc. If her clinicals were first in the day, it would have started much earlier because she told me she had a long drive to the hospital, end quote. So you have this situation where maybe Maura does need to get her car back to lot 12 so that it's there for the day when she leaves for clinicals with Aaron Murphy in the morning. So if Aaron Murphy is picking her up from Melville Hall, that's the polite thing to do, not have her meet you at lot 12 where you leave your car. You do it the night before. So that might explain the big loop. But of course, I'm sure most people are wondering, why doesn't she just go left out of the Melville Hall parking lot? So here I've got it as Thoreau Hall because, again, that's the way you need to write it to get out of the parking lot. But you'll notice if you go left, if you're just trying to go to Sortino Field, you can't go left out of this parking lot. You have to go right and either make a U-turn or make a big loop. And so because of that, I think that Maura had a similar thing going on, which would have led her to being in this area at 48 Triangle. You'll notice this little orange area here. That's right in front of Melville Hall. And so if Maura did make a U-turn, she's got to drive by her place of work, past the windows, where she normally has her car parked out front. I mean, that might be noticeable. So you take the long way, especially if you got to make a phone call or if there's someone right at that U-turn intersection, making a big loop and taking the right-hand turns, mostly all the way to lot 12, it's a better option. And so why hasn't this come up before? Why haven't these parking possibilities been presented? I mean, they seem quite viable. Well, I would argue that they've been purposely omitted. As I showed in my other video of Vasi Connection Part 1, there's a couple accounts that date back to the beginning that seem to have specific goals. One of the goals back then was to suggest that Vasi was impossibly far from where Maura would have been parked, that he was off campus, that the whole idea just makes no sense as a reason for her state of dissociation. He is off campus, Vasi, but it's so close to campus that it's like might as well be campus. So why make it seem like off campus equals so far away? Those same accounts and other offshoots will say things like Maura was upset from this call with her sister and she's in a state of dissociation after. That was the narrative. It was like 10:30 with Kathleen and then 1 a.m. or so Maura's in a state. Well, in a recent podcast, which features Julie, and I thought would contain a lot of helpful information, there's something really, really weird that happens. And this is uncomfortable for me, but I feel compelled to highlight it because I feel like the truth is being buried here. And it's exactly what we used to see from Peabody and Grassy Knoll and those accounts from the beginning. And I mentioned that Helena Murray operated in some of these forums and didn't fix it. She didn't say, hey, there was a call to Bill at 12:07. She didn't say, anything really. And it makes you wonder. And so you're going to hear these women try really hard to avoid connecting the 12:07 call to Bill with Maura's being upset. Have a listen.
So we'll take you through the couple of days beforehand. So Friday, February 5th, 2004, Maura makes a phone call on Friday evening to her sister, Kathleen, while she was on break from her evening campus security job. February 6th, 2004. In the early morning hours of February 6th, at around 1 a.m., people noticed that Maura's visibly upset. It was later alleged that Maura had received a phone call around this time that made her pretty upset, like visibly upset to the point where she couldn't talk. She couldn't stay on the job. She wasn't checking people in. Her supervisor actually had to escort her back to her dorm. And so when asked what was wrong, all Maura could say was, "My sister."
You just heard the hosts in trying to find a reasonable explanation for Maura being in a state of dissociation that night go from the call with Kathleen shortly after 10 p.m. and jump 3 hours later to 1 a.m. when Maura's in her state and skip over the 12:07 call to Bill, which is way closer to her being upset. They have the phone records in front of them. There are two women doing a true crime podcast, and they can't bring themselves to acknowledge the 12:07 call with Maura's significant other. Does that seem believable to you?
We did get confirmation from Julie that the phone call that took place at 10 p.m. that night was between Maura and Kathleen. Kathleen was Maura's oldest sister. She was in and out of rehab a few times for alcohol abuse and was supposedly busted for growing pot in Vermont, which in 2021, we don't even blink an eye at that.
No.
Back in the early 2000s, it was not okay legally.
Right.
Kathleen claims that the conversation was related to her alcohol abuse, and her fiance had taken her to a liquor store, like literally right after she had gotten out of rehab.
Yeah, and she said that in interviews before, so that's not like hearsay, but yeah, she said literally on the way back from rehab, they went to a liquor store together.
So this is probably what made Maura so upset that night.
Yeah, that's what she thinks it is. I mean, that the timeline lines up. Kind of. I mean, the phone call was at 10, and by the time the supervisor came and saw Maura, it was around 1 a.m. But I just know that there's a lot of talk out there of, like, what happened to make her so upset? Like, what was the phone call? Was the phone call right at 1? Was it on her? Whatever.
Was it on her? Whatever.
We know from phone records that she talked to somebody at 10. Julie said it was Kathleen, and that's the conversation. So, I mean, that's a conversation that would make anyone upset.
Definitely.
So
your sister just gets out of rehab and is having like a breakdown, and you're not there. You can't go and see her.
Yeah,
all you can do is talk. There was no FaceTime back then.
That's true.
So, yeah, I wouldn't want to stay at my desk job either. My thoughts would be running through my head like, oh my God,
exactly.
Like, I hope she's okay. Like, oh, geez.
Yeah, it makes sense that would be. So we think that's the reason why she was so upset.
This does not strike me as honest research. It's spin, and it's insulting to Maura's memory. If Maura hit Vasi, that doesn't make her a monster. She might have just received some really bad advice in that moment.
But we're trying to convolute it, so it's going to be a little... Just stick with us.